And now I'd like to welcome John Fund, who is going to talk to us about the elections.
My entire career in the lamestream media, although not of the lamestream media. After that last panel, I thought I should just resign. But no, because I'm a little different, and I hope to prove that to you today. By the way, I first have to ask you, how many of you out there listen to Fox News? How about National Review, the American Spectator, or the Wall Street Journal? See, the least I could do, since I think that covers just about everyone here, is to come and thank you for helping to pay my salary. There is good media out there to support, in addition to the people you just heard from. Voter fraud. You know, it's interesting. Throughout the last few months, we have heard this constant mantra. There is no voter fraud. It's a problem in search. It's a solution in search of a problem when we have voter ID laws or other efforts at voter integrity. You know, the same people who say that are the ones who support the gun grabbers. An interesting cross-fertilization. There is no voter fraud. Well, let me tell you, voter fraud is everywhere, and its potential is growing as we have more close elections. And whether it's local elections for city council, or for county legislature, or for state legislature, or for Congress, it can have an impact on your rights, because often your rights are most threatened at the local level. That's where a few votes stolen here or there can have the most impact. Now, there is no voter fraud. I hear that everywhere I go. But then I open up the papers or I open up websites and I see the strangest things. In California, this week, a drug dealer who had been deported came back to this country, got arrested again. He was indicted on 15 counts of various crimes, including voter registration fraud and voting illegally. Iowa, just that last week, 3 people picked up and sent to jail. Non-citizens voting illegally. 2 Canadians, 1 Mexican. Maryland, the Democratic congressional candidate for the 1st District, Annapolis, had to resign because it was discovered that she had voted twice in 2 different states in the same election. Very civic-minded. Colorado, just a discussion of Secretary of State Scott Gessler that there were thousands of possible non-citizens on the voter registration rolls prompted 430 people to spontaneously write into the Secretary of State's office and say, you know, I think I made a mistake once upon a time at the DMV. I think I'm somehow registered to vote, but I'm a non-citizen. Will you please remove my name from the list? Arkansas, Bill Clinton denounced those who want voter integrity from the podium of the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. 2 hours before he mounted the podium, a Democratic state legislator, a city councilman in West Memphis, and a police official all were convicted of 45 counts of voter fraud back in Arkansas. And it was an election that was won by 8 votes. Then, of course, we are told voter impersonation fraud can't happen. Would never happen. But in April, a young 22-year-old kid working for James O'Keefe of Acorn fame was sent into Eric Holder's polling place. You know Eric Holder, the infernal general at the Injustice Department? And this fellow, Eric Holder, had lived in the precinct for 32 years. You'd think they'd know him. This guy didn't look anything like him. And he said, do you have an Eric Holder at such and such terrace? And they said, oh, sure, here's your ballot. He didn't even say he was Eric Holder. Well, he was smart enough. He wasn't going to cast the ballot and commit a crime. He was just trying to test the system and show on video how easy it is to mess with the system. So he said, well, you know, I'd really feel better if I went out to get my ID. Well, you don't need an ID. You don't need an ID. Well, I really feel better. I'll go out in my car and get my ID. I'll be back faster than you can say furious. The poll worker didn't get the joke. Eric Holder is so dense on this issue, or so, shall we say, evasive, He was asked the other day, well, Mr. Holder, you oppose all these voter ID laws as racist, the return of Jim Crow, but at your own Justice Department, you require people to show government-issued photo ID to enter the Justice Department. And he looked at the reporter and said, no, you don't. And the reporter was slack-jawed. What? I mean, of course you do. And Holder says, no, anybody can come in and say hi to me, see to me. They don't need an ID. I mean, he gets away with so much for the next 38 days. But if I'm wrong and Eric Holder has another lease on his office and it's done through voter fraud, the voter fraud will have a direct impact on your rights and your way of life. Look, we have a White House right now where the incumbent president of the United States, Barack Obama, we all know he supposedly began as a community organizer. Yes, he did. But after he became a community organizer, and before he became an Illinois state senator, what was he doing? His first job in electoral politics was as head of the voter registration campaign for a group called Project Vote in Chicago. Project Vote was the voter registration arm of ACORN, the group that filed 1.4 million false registrations in 2008. The group that was so extreme that the inside joke in the group was, our left hand doesn't know what our extreme left hand is doing. ACORN loved what Barack Obama did with Project Vote so much, they made him their top trainer in Chicago. They liked what he did so much, they made him their top lawyer for civil rights cases. Barack Obama was the ACORN's lawyer in the case that cemented motor voter as the law of the land. Motor voter, which allows anyone to register with a postcard even if they're non-existent, fictitious registrations, and prevents states from cleaning up their voter registration rolls. Our voter registration rolls are in such a mess that the Pew Research Center, a liberal organization, says 1 out of 8 registrations in this country are invalid or contain major errors. That is an engraved invitation to voter fraud. They also say 2 million dead people are on our voter registration rolls. Look, I believe we should respect the dead, but I do not believe in representation without respiration. So here we have a candidate who got into the White House completely ignoring and obscuring his role with ACORN. When ACORN collapsed after O'Keefe's videos, Barack Obama was nowhere near the wreckage. But this president was marinated in the tactics of ACORN. He is the president from ACORN. And this election is going to be very, very close. Trust me. The polls, well, I can talk to you later about the polls, but it's going to be a very close election. And in a close election, if you don't think some of Barack Obama's friends won't want to put a finger on the scale of democracy, you're fooling yourself. There are things we can do in the next 38 days. There are groups out there, Judicial Watch, TrueTheVote.org, which is a national organization of volunteers that want to have hundreds of thousands of poll workers and poll watchers. Lots of people to examine the voter registration lists and see which are in error. Clean up the absentee ballot program, make sure the absentee ballots are actually submitted by real people and go out to real addresses. There's a lot that can be done. And we have to do it, because the worst thing that would happen in this election is if we lose so narrowly, and yet there's so many reports of fraud, bureaucratic bungling, ballots left missing, ballots suddenly discovered, like the Al Franken race in Minnesota in 2008, and I'll close with this. They say voter fraud never makes a difference. It changed history in Minnesota, because when Al Franken was finally sworn in after 8 months of legal battles and a 312 vote supposed margin of victory, he became the 60th senator in the Democratic caucus for Obamacare. They needed 60 votes to break the filibuster. They did it on Christmas Eve, 2 a.m., just before Scott Brown came in and knocked down their margin to 59. Obamacare would not have passed in its current form without Al Franken's vote. Now, we know there were a lot of irregularities in that vote. Mark Ritchie, the Secretary of State that ACORN elected in Minnesota, presided over that election. But here's one fact you may not know. After Franken was sworn in, a group called Minnesota Majority, which includes a lot of proud gun owners, They went through all the records and they found, without any controversy about their facts, that 1,100 felons voted illegally in that Senate race. 1,100. Now, we don't know exactly who they voted for. It's a secret ballot. But when Fox News went out and interviewed a bunch of them, 9 out of 10 said Al Franken. Academic studies, cited by John Lott and others, have shown that, well, if you go to states that register by party, it seems that one party seems to attract about 75% of the registrations. I'll leave it at that. So Al Franken was elected illegitimately. And he brought us Obamacare illegitimately. We can't do anything about that now, but we can do something about that this November. Now, in Minnesota, they couldn't prosecute any of those felons unless they proved intent, that they actually knew what they were doing was wrong. And of course, a smart felon would say, oh, I forgot. Gee, I didn't know. I could have had a V8, whatever. It takes a dumb felon to say, yeah, I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. What's it to you, copper? Well, we found 198 of them, and they've been convicted of voting illegally in that election. 66 more in the pipeline, dozens more being investigated. We could end up with more people convicted of voting illegally in the Al Franken election than his margin of victory. And it changed history, and it changed 1/6 of the economy, and it changed your health care, your children's health care, and your grandchildren's health care, of course, until we repeal Obamacare. So, this is an issue we should care about. It is directly related to all of our rights, including your gun rights. And close elections are happening more often than ever. It can be stopped. It's a lot like shoplifting. You just pay a little bit of attention and have a little bit of risk built into the activity, and you reduce it dramatically. Just putting up signs and cameras in a store often will reduce shoplifting by 25 to 40%. The same with voter fraud. Go out, support groups like Judicial Watch and True the Vote. Monitor this election. Make sure they don't steal this one. I will be out signing my book right after I finish speaking. I'd be happy to chat with you. You don't have to buy a book. Happy to meet you. Some of my best stories in the book came from people in this room. Thank you very much. I'll see you outside at the book table.